My name is Eleanor May Whitmore, and I'm 78 years old. For most of my life, I believed in one thing: family above everything. I spent decades scrubbing floors, cooking meals, and putting away every penny I could just to make sure my children had more than I ever did. I thought love and sacrifice were the same thing. I thought if I gave them everything, they'd never leave me behind. But I was wrong. It was a Sunday afternoon when I realized I wasn't a mother anymore, not to them. I sat in my small living room, my worn Bible resting on my lap, waiting for the knock on the door that never came. My birthday. 78 years old, and my own blood hadn't even remembered. Not a call, not a card, not a whisper of acknowledgement. I stared at the clock until the day faded into night, and with every tick, I felt myself disappearing. That evening, I shuffled into the kitchen and opened the fridge. A half-eaten pot of chicken soup sat on the middle shelf. I ate it cold, spoonful by spoonful, tears dripping into the broth. The silence of the house was so heavy, I thought it might crush me. And then the phone rang. My heart leapt, thinking it might be one of them, maybe even an apology. But when I picked up, it wasn't family at all. It was a voice I hadn't heard in years, and what they told me made my blood run cold. I wasn't always this lonely old woman staring at empty walls. Once, I was a young bride, filled with hope and wild dreams. I grew up in a small town in Kentucky, the kind where everyone knew your business before you did. My parents didn't have much, but they gave me grit and faith. And when I met Raymond Whitmore at the county fair, I thought God himself had sent him to me. Raymond wasn't handsome in the movie star way. His face was sunburned from years working on his daddy's farm, his hands rough and calloused. But when he smiled at me that night, holding a jar of lemonade, I felt safer than I'd ever felt in my life. Within a year, I married him under the old oak tree behind his parents' barn. No fancy dress, no expensive ring, just promises whispered into the summer air. We built a life from scratch. A little house with peeling paint, 2 rocking chairs on the porch, and the kind of love that could make beans and cornbread taste like a feast. Soon came the babies, first Ruth, then Samuel, then little Caroline. I gave my body, my sleep, my youth to them without hesitation. Each night, I'd rock them to sleep, whispering that they'd always be my pride, my joy, my purpose. Money was tight, but we made it work. I patched clothes until the fabric itself gave up, canned vegetables from our garden, and worked nights at the diner once the kids were old enough to be alone with Raymond. We didn't have vacations, but we had laughter around the dinner table. Back then, I believed that was enough. But what I didn't know, what no one tells you when you're young, is that love isn't always repaid with love. Sometimes it's forgotten. Sometimes, it's used against you. And the first crack in my perfect picture came the day Raymond didn't come home. I still remember that evening as if it's tattooed on my skin. The kids were sprawled across the living room floor, coloring in their little books, while I stirred a pot of stew. The front porch light flickered on, but Raymond's truck never pulled into the driveway. At first, I thought maybe he'd stopped to help a neighbor. He was always that kind of man. But as the hours ticked by, my chest tightened, and every creak of the house sounded like doom creeping closer. It was just past midnight when headlights finally swept across the yard. Only it wasn't Raymond. It was Sheriff Dillard, hat in hand, eyes cast down the way men look when they carry a coffin in their voice. He told me there'd been an accident on Route 27. A drunk driver. My Raymond didn't even make it to the hospital. The pot of stew burned black on the stove as my knees hit the kitchen floor. The kids woke to my screaming, their little faces pressed against the doorway, too young to understand that the life we knew had ended. The funeral was a blur, neighbors bringing pies we never touched, hymns I couldn't sing without breaking. I wore black for a year, but truthfully, I never stopped wearing grief. Raymond had been my anchor, and without him, I was a ship tossed in a storm. Still, I had no choice but to keep going. Bills piled up, mouths needed feeding. I worked double shifts at the diner, scrubbed motel floors on weekends, anything to keep a roof over our heads. The calluses on my hands thickened, but so did my resolve. I told myself it would be worth it, that the children would see my sacrifice, that they'd grow to love me all the more for never letting them fall. I didn't know then that seeds of bitterness were already taking root in their hearts, seeds that would one day turn them against me. And it all started with my eldest, Ruth. Ruth was only 12 when Raymond died, but grief made her older overnight. She stopped braiding her little sister's hair, stopped laughing at Samuel's silly jokes. Her eyes carried a hardness that no child should ever know. At first, I told myself it was just the pain of losing her father. But as the years went on, I realized it was something deeper. She blamed me. Every argument, every slammed door, every tear-soaked pillow led back to that night. If you'd made Daddy stay home, if you hadn't needed him out so late. She never said it outright, but the accusation hung in the air like smoke. I became the villain in her story. By the time Ruth was 16, she barely spoke to me unless it was to demand something. New shoes. Money for a dance. Gas for the car she begged me to co-sign for. I worked extra shifts just to keep up, telling myself this was what mothers did. I thought if I gave her everything, she'd see how much I loved her. But nothing I gave was ever enough. One night, I found her sneaking back in through the window, mascara smeared, smelling of alcohol. When I begged her to be careful, she spat venom that cut deeper than any knife. You ruined my life the day Daddy died. You're nothing but a tired old woman, and I can't wait to get away from you. Her words knocked the wind out of me, but I swallowed the pain. I still had Samuel and Caroline to protect, still had to keep this fragile family from collapsing. So I let Ruth drift further away, believing time might soften her anger. But time doesn't always heal. Sometimes, it sharpens the blade. And I would soon discover that Ruth wasn't just pulling away, she was plotting something that would break me in ways I never imagined. Ruth left home at 18 with nothing but a suitcase and a heart full of anger. I stood on the porch that morning, watching her drive off in the beat-up car I had co-signed for, praying she'd find peace out there in the world. She didn't look back, not once. I told myself she just needed space, that one day she'd call and say, "Mama, I'm sorry." But that call never came. What did come, years later, was a letter. Not from Ruth herself, but from the county courthouse. I sat at the kitchen table, hands trembling as I read the words that blurred together through my tears. Ruth had filed papers to have me declared unfit. She claimed I was too old, too unstable to manage my finances. She wanted power of attorney, over the little house Raymond and I built, over the pension I'd scraped together, over everything I had left. My own daughter. I remember dropping the letter onto the table, staring at the faded family photos on the wall. Her sweet gap-toothed smile in second grade. Her prom dress I had stitched by hand. How had that little girl turned into this stranger who wanted to strip me bare? The court date was worse. Ruth sat across the room in a crisp blazer, her voice cold as she told the judge I was forgetful and reckless. Lies, every one of them. I wanted to stand up and scream, to shake her and beg her to remember who I was, the mother who had bled and worked for her. But all I could do was sit there, my heart breaking with every word. The judge didn't grant her request, not that day. But Ruth's eyes as we left the courthouse told me she wasn't finished. She would come back. She would try again. And the cruelest part. I didn't even know why. I went home that night and locked the door, for the first time in my life afraid of my own child. And as I sat there in the silence, Samuel came knocking. And what he told me next changed everything. Samuel was my middle child, always the quiet one. Where Ruth's anger was a storm, Samuel was the calm after it. Steady, thoughtful, the kind of boy who fixed broken radios and brought me wildflowers from the roadside. After Ruth's betrayal, it was Samuel who held me up when I thought I'd collapse. That night, when he knocked on my door, I expected comfort. I expected him to say, "Mama, don't worry. I'll protect you." And in a way, he did. But he also brought a truth that stole the little air left in my lungs. "Mama," he said, his eyes lowered. "Ruth ain't acting alone. Caroline's been talking with her. They're planning something." My baby Caroline. Sweet Caroline, with her dimpled smile and gentle spirit. She was the one I thought would never turn on me. I shook my head, refusing to believe it. But Samuel wouldn't let me hide in denial. He showed me a message on his phone, words that cut like glass. "We need to get Mama's place sold before she ruins it. Don't let her drag us down with her." It was signed with Caroline's name. I sat back in my chair, my body trembling. Both my daughters, my flesh and blood, had decided I was nothing more than a burden, a wallet, a house to be gutted for parts. My chest ached so hard I thought I might die right there. Samuel knelt beside me, holding my hands in his big, calloused ones. "Mama," he whispered, "I don't care what they do. You gave me everything, and I won't let them take you down. You still got me. Always." And for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I wasn't completely alone. Maybe love hadn't died in this family, not yet. But Samuel's devotion came with a cost. A secret he'd been keeping. One that would soon come to light, and force me to question whether even he could be trusted. For weeks after that courthouse battle, Samuel was my shield. He fixed the leaky faucet, drove me to church, and even mowed the lawn when my knees ached too much. He'd sit with me at the kitchen table, drinking coffee the way his daddy used to, and I'd think, at least one of my children still sees me. But there were cracks in his smile. Nights when he wouldn't come home. Mornings when his hands trembled as he reached for his mug. I told myself he was just tired, that work was wearing him down. But a mother's heart always knows. One evening, I woke to a noise outside. The porch light revealed Samuel slumped against the steps, his shirt stained, his breath heavy with whiskey. My strong, dependable boy, broken. I dragged him inside, cradled his head the way I used to when he was a child, and begged him to tell me what was tearing him apart. The truth came out in sobs. He'd been drowning in debt for years. Bad loans, bad choices, and worse friends. And to keep himself afloat, he'd borrowed money from the very people you don't ever want to owe. Men who didn't forgive. Men who would come knocking. "Mama," he choked, tears streaking his face, "I didn't want you to know. I didn't want you to think I was weak. But if Ruth and Caroline get that house, I'll have nowhere left. And neither will you." My heart shattered and swelled all at once. My only son had tried to carry his burden alone, just like I had for so long. I stroked his hair and whispered the only words I knew. "We'll figure this out, Samuel. I won't let them take us down. Not you, not me." But even as I said it, I felt the walls closing in. My daughters wanted me gone, my son was sinking fast, and I was running out of fight. And then, one Sunday morning, a stranger knocked on my door, someone who would change everything. It was early Sunday morning, the kind of quiet where even the birds seemed to rest. I was setting out 2 cups of coffee, one for me, one for Samuel, though he was still asleep on the couch, when the knock came. Heavy. Measured. The kind of knock that made the hair on my arms stand up. I opened the door, half expecting some brute with a baseball bat, come to collect on my son's mistakes. Instead, there stood a woman. Middle-aged, dressed in scrubs, her hair pulled back in a tight bun. She looked at me with eyes that carried both sorrow and warmth. "Mrs. Whitmore?" she asked softly. "Yes," I said, gripping the doorframe. "My name's Angela. I was with your husband, Raymond, the night of the accident. I've wanted to come sooner, but I didn't have the courage." Her words stole my breath. For nearly 40 years, I had lived with the picture Sheriff Dillard painted, that Raymond died instantly, that he never had the chance to say goodbye. But now, here was this woman, telling me she'd been there. Angela stepped inside, hands trembling as she held out an envelope, yellowed with age. "He gave me this, just before he passed. Told me to make sure it reached you. I kept it, but I was young and scared. I didn't know how. And then the years slipped by." My fingers shook as I opened the envelope. Inside was a single page, Raymond's handwriting still strong, still steady. His last words. Words meant only for me. I pressed the letter to my chest, tears streaming down my face. For the first time in decades, I felt my husband's presence in the room. But what struck me most wasn't just his love, it was the warning hidden inside those lines. Because in that letter, Raymond had written about something he feared. Something about our children. A shadow he had seen even then. And as I read it, my whole body went cold. I sat at the kitchen table, the envelope spread open before me, my hands trembling like a leaf in the wind. Samuel stirred on the couch, but I couldn't speak, not yet. My eyes moved across each line, soaking in my husband's voice, as if he were sitting right there beside me. Ellie, it began, if you're reading this, then I didn't make it home. I need you to know, you were my whole world. You gave me a life richer than money could buy. But I have to tell you something I couldn't bring myself to say while I was alive. I gripped the paper tighter. My heart raced. I see the way Ruth looks at me. At us. That hunger in her eyes. It isn't just for more than we can give. It's for control. She's smart, Ellie, but she's hard. Too hard. I fear what she'll do when I'm gone. And the younger ones, they follow her lead more than you know. My chest tightened, tears blurring the words. He had seen it. He had known. Even back then, before the anger, before the lawsuits, before the betrayal, Raymond had known our children carried something darker inside them. If I'm not there to guide them, promise me you'll be strong. Promise me you won't let them turn that hunger on you. You deserve better, Ellie. You deserve peace. If they ever make you feel like you don't belong, go find people who will love you for you. Blood isn't the only family God gives us. By the time I reached the end, my hands had gone numb. Raymond had left me love, but also a warning that one day my children would try to break me. And here I was, living in the shadow of that prophecy. I looked up at Samuel, asleep, his face lined with exhaustion. Could I trust him, after everything? Or had my husband's warning stretched to all three of them? The letter slipped from my fingers, landing on the table with a soft thud. And in that silence, I knew I couldn't keep waiting for my children to love me back. It was time to do something I never thought I'd do. And in Chapter 10, I'll tell you how I turned their betrayal into my greatest revenge. The night after reading Raymond's letter, I didn't sleep. I sat in my chair, staring out the window at the moonlit yard, and I made a decision. I was done begging my children to love me. If blood had turned against me, then I would find new blood. No, better than blood. I would build a family of my own choosing. The next morning, I walked into the local senior center. My knees ached, my heart was heavy, but I carried my Bible and Raymond's letter in my purse. At first, I thought I'd just sit quietly, maybe listen to the choir. But then a woman named Marjorie invited me to play bingo. A retired teacher. A widow like me. By the end of the week, I had a table full of new friends who called me by name, who laughed at my jokes, who didn't see me as a burden. Days turned into weeks. We shared meals, secrets, even late-night phone calls when the loneliness tried to creep back in. These people, strangers at first, became my family. They clapped for me on my birthday. They showed up with soup when I caught the flu. They hugged me without asking for anything in return. And then came the moment I'd been waiting for. Ruth and Caroline showed up on my porch one afternoon, all fake smiles and polished nails. They spoke sweetly, too sweetly, about helping me downsize. They wanted the house. They wanted everything. But this time, I didn't tremble. I invited them inside, and when they stepped into the living room, they froze. Sitting there were Marjorie, a half-dozen friends from the senior center, even Pastor Lewis. My new family. My witnesses. I laid Raymond's letter on the table between us. Your father saw through you, I said, my voice steady. And now I do too. You will not take this house. You will not take my peace. I am not yours to control. Their faces burned with shock and rage, but I didn't flinch. For the first time in my life, they were the ones left speechless. And as they stormed out the door, slamming it behind them, I felt no sadness. Only freedom. Now, at 78, I sit at a table surrounded by friends who love me more than my own blood ever did. Strangers, yes, but strangers who chose me, who saw me, who lifted me when my own children tried to break me. I once thought I'd die alone. But now I know the truth. Sometimes family isn't who you're born to. Sometimes, family is who you find along the way.